This email was sent to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Donnie in Allentown, Pennsylvania. Jim, I've heard you on numerous occasions refer to Barry Windham as the best worker in the NWA during 1987. So how upsetting was it for you to see Windham come into the WWF in 1996 as mid-card at best with a stupid gimmick like the Stalker? I mean, I'm sure you were happy he found work, but what happened to him? He never seemed to go to the next level.
Oh, we've talked about it before. Barry was a lot like Blackjack. Blackjack would move around a lot. Barry switched back and forth. Every time Dusty wanted to push him, something would happen. He'd go to New York, or every time he got a spot there, he wouldn't like it, he'd come back. And then the early 90s, they were really pushing him and going to use him on top in WCW, but the business was horrible. And, I could research and do a little, profile of Barry's career, but basically after that first few years of the 90s WCW run, he'd already had some injuries. He gained weight. He lost mental motivation. People have said about Barry before also, I don't think he ever wanted to be the guy and have that pressure put on him. He wanted to be a top guy and one of the guys, but not the guy. And it seemed like he always shied away from that spot or did things that would keep him from having to fucking fill that spot. And by the mid-90s when he came in, I mean, there were still flashes, but he was heavier. He had the Blackjack genes where, he was heavier. He was slowed down. He was older. He wasn't mentally motivated. And then the gimmicks, the Stalker gimmick came from when Vince interviews everybody. He will talk to you about your interests and what you do and what experiences you've had in your life or whatever. And Barry Windham at the time, he was living in South Georgia out in a fucking swamp, and he liked to go hunting and he liked to go gator hunting and all the things the Stalker was doing, right? Guns and bows and arrows and shit. So they made that a gimmick out of a guy that had been, just a few years beforehand, presented as a top talent on their only national competition. And instead of utilizing Blackjack Mulligan, his father was a WWF tag team champion. They had footage. And then they tried to do the new Blackjacks after that, which was even worse. Poor Jack Lanza and me had to be involved in that as producers, which I don't know that Jack was thrilled, but I could see that it wasn't going to go anywhere. But instead of saying, here's Barry Windham, his father was a great wrestler, but we're not going to make him dye his hair and grow a mustache like his father and, send him back to his rookie year when he was Blackjack Mulligan Jr. But his father was a great champion. This guy's been a champion in many organizations, and just let him be Barry Windham. First he was the Stalker. Then he was the new Blackjacks. Then he was there when, Shitstain foisted the NWA invasion off. And since he was synonymous with the NWA, they finally let him be himself, Barry Windham. But in the midst of a bunch of guys that the only people they could beat was each other in these 3-minute matches. It was just underneath mid-card bullshit. And I mean, after that, there was a few independent dates. He went back to WCW for a year or two, right?
Was he in the West Texas Rednecks?
Yeah, I think so.
With Kendall and Kurt Hennig and Bobby Duncombe Jr.?
And then they closed, and it just, that was pretty much it. And it's a shit, but he definitely was, yes. For the 80s, I didn't say the best worker in the NWA. I said maybe the best worker in the business. Definitely in North America. Just at his size, it's so smooth and everything was there, and he could sell like Ricky Morton, but he could come off the top. His bumps were effortless. His shit looked good, and he had timing. And he made everybody that he got in the ring with made him look better.
Beyond any motivation issues, how big was the fact that he had knee issues?
It didn't help, and especially in keeping weight off. And You know what? We didn't. On
the Terry Gordy story. We were going to talk about
the Terry Gordy show on our story on one of the shows we did here recently, and we branched off, and I just realized that. But
me too.
That's the thing. A guy that, well, I'll tell it to you now here in a second. A guy that big, when you've got knee issues, it prevents you from being as mobile, and also prevents you from, really keeping weight off. In Gordy's case, he finally went the opposite direction. I tore my right ACL in 86 in the scaffold match at Starrcade, and I tore my left one in 87 in Philly in a bad spot in the ring at a house show. And I had to wear the knee braces and et cetera. When Gordy came in 89, he was wearing the same design knee brace as the second round that I got. And I said, well, you got a bad ACL? He said, I got two of them. I said, what? What had happened was that he tore in Japan. He was over there so much, and they worked hard, and they never took time off. He tore his ACL in one leg by taking an atomic drop. And it just so happened when the guy picked him up and fucking spiked him down, he landed on both feet, but his one leg was locked, and he tore the fucking ACL on an atomic drop, because that's when he was 300 pounds. And he obviously didn't take any time off and didn't have it fixed, and started overcompensating. And within a year or so, he told me that he tore the other one, putting too much weight on, overcompensating, too much pressure and use on that knee, and he tore it some other kind of way. And he had two blown ACLs, and that's when he dropped weight. If you go back and watch 89 Gordy versus 91 Gordy or whatever it was, there was a significant weight loss because he wanted to have less weight on his knees, because he never did take time off to get them fixed. So every one of those matches in Japan or in WCW or with the Steiners or whatever that you saw Gordy have after 1989, he was having them on two bad knees with no ACL in each knee.
It may have been even earlier than that, because in 86 in the UWF, when he was the champion, he had more tape. Go look at his knees there. He had so much tape on his knees. It's amazing he was able to work.
Then it may have been earlier. You're right. Because somewhere in that 4 or 5 year time frame, mid 80s to 90, he had done all that. But yeah, and it wasn't like he was diving or taking stupid risks. It was just shit that happens when you took that kind of punishment and those stiff matches night after night for long periods of time. Even something simple, boom, sooner or later is going to do it. So yeah, with Barry, that was a thing also, with injuries and just all those bumps at that size and gaining weight and not being motivated. And if he'd have stuck with Dusty the first time, he probably would have had the best run of his life for the longest period of his life. But when he left that time, that opened the door for Magnum. And the only thing that opened the door for Barry to come back and take that spot again was Magnum's accident.